to the Ben Motorcycle Adventures podcast, your hub for everything off-road, dual sport, and adventure motorcycle. My name is John. I will be your host. This is episode number 25, Ben Motorcycle Adventures podcast. Thank you for joining, and as always, thank you for listening. Quarter century episode. I can't believe we made it. I started this podcast about 2.5 months ago, and here we are, 25 episodes deep. A lot of great guests have been on here. I want to thank you all, and a lot of great guests to come. Tonight is no exception. We're going to talk to Kerri from MotoBird Adventures. Motorcycle ownership among women climbs to 19%. Now, this is a headline I'm reading from womenridersnow.com. I don't know if they have a print publication, but this was written and published here on November 30th of 2018. So the data is relevant, and I've seen that number anywhere between 18 and 23%. So no sense in getting into the nitty-gritty, the standard deviations, whatever the case may be. The reality is that motorcycle ownership among women it's on the rise. It's nearly doubled over the past few years, and I think this podcast is evidence of that. Like, we've interviewed Norley, who is adventuring around the world. Tracy Charles is preparing to ride around the world. And we had Jen on the podcast, who's ridden her Triumph all over the West Coast. So women are getting out there and adventuring. They own motorcycles. And it's not just a male-dominated sport anymore. Now, our guest tonight, Kerri, she's really situated to take advantage of that emerging market, if you will. MotoBird Adventures is a company that, the business model is motorcycle trips for women, and Kerri hosts tours in California, Baja, and Belize, and they're all women's only tours. And I really try to dig into the thought process behind that, and kind of I don't hold back. I ask some questions about, from a female perspective, what is it like to ride amongst a group of men, and how does that differ when you get a group of women out there together on an adventure? So very interesting podcast, episode 25, Ben Motorcycle Adventures. Let's talk to Kerri from MotoBird Adventures. Yeah, let's just get right into it. MotoBirdAdventures.com, motorcycle trips for women. I want to obviously dig into that a lot deeper here, but let's talk about you for a minute. Where did you grow up, and then what brought you to the West Coast?
Yeah, so I grew up in New York, and then after high school I moved down to Baltimore City for college. I didn't ride motorcycles until I was about 24. And then after riding for about 2 years, I was all of my friends had kind of left Baltimore, and that chapter of my life was kind of closing up. And so I got rid of pretty much everything I had and dropped my pets off with my folks in New York. And I just took off on a KLR and went cross country, kind of meandering on and off the bike for about a year. When was it? I did Baja a couple times, and then kind of ran out of money and had some friends in the Bay Area, and that's pretty much how I wound up here.
So interesting. So you ended up on a KLR. Had you ridden a motorcycle prior to setting off across the States?
I did. I had been riding for about 1.5 2 years, but I bought the KLR about a week before I left.
Awesome.
And before that, I was on like a little Suzuki TU 250, which is very different from a KLR.
For sure. Was that a 650?
The Suzuki was the KLR was a 250, but the Suzuki was a 250.
Yeah, my dad had a KLR 250 when I was younger, and that was actually a really, really great bike. It's a shame they don't make that anymore.
I've heard good things about them, but I've not ridden one.
Okay. So what made you set off on that first adventure anyway?
I've always done a lot of traveling. And I just needed something new. I needed something different. I was at a job I wasn't fulfilled with. It was kind of take it or leave it type work. And I didn't have much going on, and it was kind of the perfect time. I was looking for something, but at the same time not looking for anything. And just having the opportunity to hop on the bike and go was kind of what I just took. I just took that opportunity.
Sure, and it's weird how the excuse me. It's weird how the freedom that you realize on a motorcycle can really make you look at and weigh some of the other things you're doing in your life. I've totally been there, and especially over the past couple of years, it's really made me reflect on what I've done, and then moving forward, how I'm going to utilize the rest of my time here. It's crazy.
Yeah, and also, I was kind of having a hard time with just not having any direction in life at that point, and having a lot of things kind of coming to a close. And in the time that I had been riding that year to 2 years prior to this trip, just being on the bike and doing a couple overnight trips here and there, and being alone on my bike and kind of gaining those skills and having those terrible things that happen when you first start riding because you don't know what you're doing. They really helped me kind of, like, we always talk as riders about being in that meditative state, and, they joke about there not being motorcycles parked in front of therapist's office or what have you.
I love that.
There's something to it, like it was very empowering for me, and it kind of allowed me to do a lot of reflection and thinking in a different way.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that quote about no motorcycles being in front of a therapist's office, because riding the bike is therapeutic. People ask me about it who've never done it, and I say, when you're on your motorcycle, that's all you can think about. You don't have time for any stressors or worries or day-to-day stuff. You're not staring at your phone like we have a tendency to do nowadays. So it is a way to completely disconnect.
It is. And I think it also gives really good perspective on things too, because then you kind of start to think about, like, well, what does actually matter and what doesn't matter? Especially on the bike with my thought, like, when I'm riding, it's pretty much I'm focusing on the task of riding, and there's very little space for much else to go on in my head unless I'm out, on some very empty roads. But even then, you're never not thinking about riding. But it's a matter of what else you then kind of prioritize to let in your mind. Yeah,
very interesting. Now, again, MotoBird Adventures, you went on this motorcycle adventure. Did you start the business immediately thereafter, or did that take some time to kind of formulate?
It took some time. Once I settled in the San Francisco Bay Area, I kind of just picked up a bunch of jobs to make as much money as I could. And then again, felt very directionless and not really knowing where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. And so it wasn't for, I think, about a year that I was here, and then kind of realizing, or maybe it was 2 years I was here before I had this moment of clarity, I guess, where I was realizing I'm doing way too much. So I quit one of the jobs I was working and just kind of took off for Baja for a week. I figured being alone on the bike would be great for me to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had a couple of guys tag along on my trip. Unexpectedly, it was a friend of a friend who had never been down there before. And I just became their impromptu tour guide, which was fun and frustrating for, you get the push and pull of both of those feelings. And at one point, one of the guys looked at me after a long, exhausting day and kind of said, "Oh, you could do this. You could charge people and take people around here. Like, you know what you're doing." And I was like, "Oh, After he said that, the gears started turning, and it was pretty much all I thought about the rest of the trip.
Interesting. And as an aside, I want to ask you this. You're talking about living in cities like New York, Baltimore, San Francisco. Those are big cities. Do you think it's easier to kind of get lost in the shuffle there and kind of lose direction? I mean, I'm a small town person. I think I grew up in a town of like 10,000 people. Now I live here where there's around 100. Do you think it's different in larger cities like that?
I don't know. I think it could be, possibly, but it really depends on what you're looking for. For me, I've always kind of had off jobs. I bartend a lot, which is great. So I'm not normally stuck in that daily grind, traffic, crowded supermarkets, crowded highways. So I luckily can avoid that kind of rat race feeling. And a lot of the times I am out and about, it's not as hectic out. Mm-hmm. So I miss that. And I don't personally miss, but I physically don't experience a lot of that craziness. And sure. I think because my sights are set on not having that kind of life, I don't generally get caught in it. But that being said, I think when I first got here, just being a little untethered and not knowing what I wanted, it's easy to fall into that daily grind. And for me, it was kind of just like, I'm going to float with the tide for a while. And that in and of itself was this kind of, I don't want to say meditative, but it was something I didn't have to think about, and it was easy to do. But when I was done and exhausted of it, I was done and exhausted of it.
All right. Back to the business now. MotoBird Adventures runs motorcycle tours and adventures for women. So I can't go, and that's great. I'm an advocate for everybody learning the sport and getting out and, really realizing their own adventure. But why are you specifically targeting women for your motorcycle tours?
For me, the second time I was riding through Baja alone, I kind of just had to pull over and just take everything in and kind of look at the beautiful expanse of mountains and road and desert in front of me and just sit there on my bike for a little while. And my first thought was how much I wanted my girlfriends to be with me and experience that with me. Unfortunately, none of them ride. So then it was kind of, okay, how can I get my friends on bikes and take them down here? But I think it's mostly because I feel the motorcycle industry is very focused on men, which is just what it is. And I'll go and do something on bikes or some kind of motorcycle event, and I'll be one of two women or one of three women tops. And it's more about kind of trying to change a little bit about trying to show women that there are opportunities for them in the motorcycle world. Because I think for me, especially I didn't have anybody in my family who got me into riding. And so it's very intimidating to get into the sport. I think there's a lot of information. It could be very overwhelming. And then if you have that stacked against you, and then you have the fact that there aren't as many opportunities for women in motorcycling as there are for men. And so just kind of showing women that there are different things for them in this industry. There is a space for us, and maybe they might be more inclined to ride their own motorcycle or get into the sport.
Sure. And kind of as a hypothetical, you've been on these tours where you were one of two women with a group of men. I'm just going to ask, is that awkward, or is there a different vibe or a different kind of pace on a tour like that as opposed to what you're offering?
Well, there's this weird, and this is very much, my own head and my own doing, but there's this weird need to not want to ask for help. Because because I don't want to be the woman who holds the men up. Because there's that idea that like, oh, she's a woman, she's going to ride slow, or she can't pick up her own bike, or she, which can be said of anybody, no matter what their gender is. But I think feeling that self-made pressure in the sense that like, oh, well, I want to make sure that I do everything perfect so that I don't come across as this person who doesn't know, and have that be based on my gender. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't disagree. And I'll tell you that I've ridden with large groups of guys throughout the years. Shoot, I've been riding for over 30, and Men experience that riding with other men too. There's people that won't go riding with me because they're afraid that they'll slow down the trip, or we won't get as many miles in, or it might be too technical for them. So I don't know if it's a ego thing or a machismo thing, but it's relevant for both genders too.
No, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with that. And I think the other part of it too is sometimes, well, at least my experience, the men that I've had reach out interested in joining our tours, it becomes this this kind of sexualization of women. They're like, oh, a woman who rides, and then it's instantly like the love of their life, and you're like, well, that's just just because we're women and we're on bikes, and so there's that dynamic of it as well.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see that too. But to throw a little bit more on here, you've probably seen this statistic recently too, and I don't want anybody to quote me, but it was 18 or 23% of motorcycle owners are now women. So the trend is headed in the right direction. I mean, I've had a number of women on the podcast recently, and we're bringing on some more even tonight. I've got 2 more interviews. It's exciting to see the sport grow from that angle too. I think it's just going to continue to get larger and larger and larger.
Oh, absolutely. It's fantastic. And actually, so I write for City Bike magazine, and they just came out with an article covering those numbers, kind of going a little bit more in depth about what those numbers mean. And I didn't write the article, so I don't have any of those numbers or that detail on the top of my head, but definitely worth a read.
Hey, I saw a City Bike article that you wrote, and I wanted to ask you, someone was riding a CRF 250 rally. Was that you?
Possibly. So I did a photo shoot for the article about the CRF, but I don't think I wrote anything about a CRF.
Okay. Yeah, it was your article. I was just curious if you wrote it. My girlfriend is going to get a dual sport bike. She's done some off-road riding, and that's kind of another one I threw in the mix that might be an option for her. She's pretty short, so we're going to have to overcome that or lower a bike or something like that. But we like the look of that bike too.
Yeah. So one of the guys who writes for City Bike just got a rally maybe a year ago, and he's done some work on it, or quite a bit of work on it, and he absolutely loves it. So I know if you search in City Bike for the Honda for that bike, there'll be a few articles.
Okay, cool. I will check it out. You're going to Belize in a couple of weeks here, is that correct?
Yeah.
So for me, I've always wanted to go to Belize, but I've never considered it for motorcycle riding because I don't know enough about it. But Belize is a destination. What can you tell us about, one, the riding there, and then the culture?
Oh, it's okay. It's really cool down there. It's super crazy. I didn't know much about it before I went last year. But there's a lot of different cultures happening there. So the main language in Belize is English, but in my experience, everybody speaks at least 3 languages. So you'll have Spanish, you'll have Creole, and then even inland, they speak German, and they speak Mayan, and then they speak this language that's a combination of Spanish and Mayan that unfortunately I cannot remember the name of. So you have all of these different cultures converging in this pretty tiny country. It's really, really, really interesting. And then the riding down there is great. It's super beautiful. A lot of the country is unpaved. So you have the main highways that are paved and through most of the towns and stuff, but a lot of secondary roads aren't paved, but it's mostly hard packed. So for folks who haven't ridden dirt before, it's kind of a nice place to get started. Okay. Because it's not super challenging riding off-road.
Okay, so on this particular ride, it seems that you include the motorcycle rental. So are you flying down, picking up the bikes, and then setting off from there? How does that play out?
Yeah, so I work with Alternate Adventures, which is a woman-owned motorcycle rental company in Hopkins, Belize. And we fly in to Belize City, and then we'll head down to Hopkins, which is a little further south, rent the bikes from Emma for the week, and then take off there. And so she's got a variety of bikes, 125 to 250 dual sport motorcycles.
Okay, and I've got to ask, I'm always curious about other rental companies and the accommodations. Are you guys camping, or are you utilizing lodging along the way, or how does that work for you?
Lodging along the way. And actually, so the woman who owns the rental company just opened up a hostel. So, and it's attached to where the motorcycles are stored, which is super convenient.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you've ridden across North America for the most part, or at least the States. How does that differ from riding in a country like Belize?
Definitely scale. And also, I think for me, it's easier to find things in the States. No matter where I am, you'll find a hardware store, you'll find some kind of food or lodging. But I don't know if that was always necessarily my experience in Belize. In terms of kind of booking hotels or places to stay, it's a little more roundabout process. Whereas if I'm traveling, so I traveled for about a week and a half in July, and I camped and stayed at hotels. And halfway through the day, if I decided I wanted to stay at a hotel instead of camp for some reason or another, I could hop on my phone and book a room right then and there. In Belize, to kind of book the rooms, it's an email back and forth for a week or so, and then an exchange of credit card information online, and then so it's a little different in that sense.
Sure, it's not streamlined like we have here, right? I mean,
yeah.
Okay, I get it. Now, Baja in September, we've had a number of people on the podcast that talked about Baja. I don't know if you listened to our last episode with Keith, but he basically describes it as this magical place. I'd be curious to know what it was like for you the first time you rode a motorcycle through Baja.
Oh, it was incredible. I just smiled the whole time, because first it's your first. Well, it was my first border crossing.
What was that like?
I was super intimidated and very scared, but it was nothing. It was absolutely nothing. We crossed over in Algodones, which is a very small border crossing. Got off the bikes, went inside, filled out some paperwork, went back to the bikes, and we're good to go. And there are times when I cross over in Tijuana where, because they're so used to the commuter traffic, you don't necessarily have to stop to register if you stay for less than a certain number of days and you don't go further south than Guerrero Negro. You don't have to register and sign in. So, I mean, in terms of border crossings, I haven't done any other ones, but it was really, really simple and straightforward. But never having done it before, it was very intimidating and I was very nervous. And then the first time I went down, I traveled with this guy, Bert, who is, at the time, he was 80, and had been going back and forth. Going back and forth to Baja for 40 plus years. And so he kind of knew everywhere to go, and it was nice to not have to worry about figuring out where I'm trying to go, on top of being overwhelmed with the whole idea of being in Baja to begin with. So I really did appreciate that part of it.
Let that sink in, everybody. Bert's riding at 80 plus years old. This stuff will keep you young.
Yeah, absolutely. Although at the time he wasn't long, his family wouldn't allow him to ride off-road anymore because his sight wasn't as good, so he was picking really bad lines. But he was a bit stubborn, and he kind of just did it anyway.
Yeah, it's motorcycle travel. It's one of those things tough to get out of your blood. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I can't imagine not riding. I'm sure you're in the same. If you took that away from me, it'd be a big gaping hole in my life.
Yeah, I don't know if I would allow that to happen. You know, like
Right.
there'd be some I'd have to ride. I can't imagine not.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what would check that box. So, what can your clients and guests expect? Looks like you're going to be down there for 14 days, a couple of weeks in September. What can they expect from this tour?
That September tour to Baja will be a dual sport trip. So we'll be on road and off road. And we'll stop through some of the more popular towns. We'll go wine tasting. There's the wine route through northern Baja, pretty much between Ensenada and Tecate. We'll do that at the end. And the variety of road, I'm sure you've talked to other folks down there, so you get everything from hard packed to deep sand, to rocks, to flat, to inclines, a little bit of everything, which is really nice. The last time when we went down in October, we stopped by an active prison, which was interesting.
Oh.
We just stopped in. They've got a little artisania shop inside the prison, so everything in there is made by the prisoners. And we stopped there the same day we stopped at the old prison museum in Mulegé. So it was a nice little kind of prison day, I suppose. But interesting, kind of just getting that background and history on things. And then I've included a little bit more of stopping by some museums, just again to get an idea of where it is that you're actually traveling in, have a background on that area and the history of it, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's nice to immerse yourself in the culture and kind of experience that full culture. You're not, or full circle. You're not just out there, burning up the miles, but it's more of an experience. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to do that because, no matter where it is you're traveling, you can have a great time riding, but it makes it even, I think, a more full experience to have an understanding of that land or of the history of that land or of the history of that culture.
Oh, for sure. Now, what other trips might you be hosting this year?
Let's see. So actually doing a fundraising event in April, which isn't really a trip, but it's a weekend trip. It's a choose your own adventure trip.
Okay.
And that one will be in Carrizo Plain in California. So folks can ride in. They could choose to ride dirt. They could choose to ride pavement. They could choose to camp or stay at a hotel. And I'm putting that on with Law Tigers. And we're going to project a movie one night, and we'll have live music another night, and potluck. So it's kind of choose whatever level it is and whatever type of riding it is that you want to do. So that should be a fun event. And then let's see, what else are we doing? We're doing the California Central Coast in May. And that's all pavement, and it's a shorter trip. It's kind of a nice way to get started on traveling on bikes. If you've not ever done an overnight trip on a bike, it's a great way to introduce yourself to that kind of travel and that kind of riding. We'll be doing the Lost Coast, which is that killer section of land between Fort Bragg and pretty much Eureka in Northern California. That's a dual sport trip, and it goes through the Lost Coast region, which was too wild for them to put the highway through.
Yep.
And then down to Boston again. And then in November, we're going to do another short all-paved trip through Marin and Sonoma counties.
Yeah, and back to that Lost Coast, I used to be kind of immersed in backpacking, and there's a trail on that. But there's a lot of history surrounding the Lost Coast, and that's one of those places that I need to go visit too. It looks amazing.
Oh yeah, it's that was some of my favorite riding. And it depends on when you go there as to how challenging the riding can be.
Yeah.
Because the first time I went, it must have been not long after it had rained, but all of the silt was kind of packed hard and the roads were fantastic. But then I've heard horror stories of it being really muddy and hard to get through. And then other times we went recently and it was very, very silty, which is always a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I mean, when you guys are going to go in July, I would imagine it's going to be optimal. Plus, it should be nice and cool that time of year still. So
Yeah, well, and especially where it's located, it's always a little chillier than other parts of California. So that's kind of nice where you're not terribly hot the whole time.
Okay, what are you currently riding yourself in terms of motorcycle?
I have a BMW F650 Dakar.
Okay, and what can you tell us about that bike?
The person I bought it from had actually, I don't know if he did it or the person he bought it from, but they had put a YZ250 front end on it.
Weird. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's a little bit better riding it off-road. The front suspension is better than the
Sure.
stock of the BMW. And I love it. It was a great step up from the KLR. When I had both bikes, at one point I came in from riding the KLR after switching back and forth from the BMW. And I said to a friend of mine who rides, I said, "Oh, I think something's really wrong with my KLR." And they looked at me, and they were a much more experienced rider, and they said, "No, that's just exactly what that bike does." And I was like, "Oh, is that why you wanted me to get a better bike than I had before, or more?" It kind of made my riding a lot better because the bike handles a lot better. Yeah, I love it. I think it's fantastic. Once I'm riding off-road, I'd always love something a little bit smaller that I don't have to worry about throwing the weight around as much. But in terms of its capabilities, I'm totally happy with it.
Okay. You and I were both trying to monetize group rides, and we kind of talked about how rewarding solo travel can be. But I want to read this quote from She ADV that you said, and it reads, "If you told me 6 years ago I'd be living in San Francisco, riding a BMW around with strangers, and running a motorcycle company for women, I wouldn't have believed you." So what has that been? How rewarding is that for you? And what has that been like for you, leading these women out on these tours? How satisfying is that?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's really, really great. Because I think about how much motorcycling has done for me and provided me. And it was something that I didn't think I'd ever actually do, but I had always wanted to do it. And so the fact that I overcame whatever obstacles I had kind of placed in front of myself surrounding riding, and finally took the leap and got into it, and then how rewarding that whole experience has been. And I think when it comes to my business and riding in general, there's this vulnerability of putting yourself out there. And I've been received with so much enthusiasm from folks and support and interest that it just kind of keeps feeding into the drive to do more and to go further with it.
Yeah, the group rides are really rewarding. I mean, I've even taken people here in Oregon on rides to places they've never seen, lifelong Oregonians to places they've never seen. So it's interesting to bear that responsibility and kind of lead that tribe, so to speak, through a ride. But it is a very one of the most fulfilling experiences I've had in my life too. Yeah,
and knowing how it makes me feel, being able to share that with other folks, and knowing and hoping at least that they feel similarly or get out of it what I get out of it is just really great.
Okay, any advice for, because maybe you've been here too, you've been in these shoes, advice for women on the fence, maybe looking to get into motorcycling, or even women who do ride motorcycles but haven't yet really gone out on an adventure?
Really basic. Just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. I think a lot of times people get stuck in their head trying to make a decision around something, and then once you start to overthink things, and then I don't know, maybe fear steps in or doubt of some sort, and then it gives you more reasons to not do something. And I don't mean be irresponsible about your decisions, but I think don't overthink it where you're creating fear, because there's always going to be fear. There's always going to be doubt. You're never going to have every single thing that you possibly need to do something. And I think that's part of the really great thing about riding and traveling is that you can never be fully prepared. There's just no way. And so kind of accepting that and then moving forward and making decisions off of that, knowing that there's no way to have all of the answers to everything. It's a very freeing feeling. And then it allows you to go ahead and do it. And once you finally start doing it and taking baby steps, going at the speed you want to go. But then once you do it and you see what you've done, you're kind of like, oh, I could do more. And that was really rewarding. And and then you kind of build from there.
Sure. Kind of an exponential growth, but get out there and, learn a little bit on the way, discover along the way, add to your equipment, your arsenal along the way. Like you said, if you wait till the moment to when you have the perfect bike and the perfect gear and the perfect route, you may never really set off.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Kerri, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close this one out?
I think maybe just if you're in the California area, check out the Choose Your Own Adventure, and that one's a co-ed event fundraiser in April, and that'll be on our website under our tours.
And how can we find you on social media? And your website again is MotoBirdAdventures.com.
Yes, and then we are on Instagram, MotoBird Adventures, and also on Facebook under MotoBird Adventures.
All right, Kerri, really appreciate your time, and thanks for calling in and giving us this interview. I look forward to sharing it with others.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, have a good week and have fun in Belize.
I will. Have a good one.
I will. Kerri, thank you for coming on the podcast. Have a great time in Belize. MotoBirdAdventures.com, at MotoBird Adventures on Facebook and Instagram. Look, if you're a woman who wants to get out and ride with a large group of females, Kerri can help you out, and she's going to some amazing destinations: California coast, Baja, and Belize. I'm jealous. Again, MotoBirdAdventures.com. BenMotorcycleAdventures.com. That is our website. Go check out our blog. Listen to all of our podcasts. Haven't dropped any long-form written content in a while, but that's a lot of that's going to come when the weather changes. I should perhaps save some stuff for these dreary winter months, but you know what? There's a lot of content coming at you via the podcast. And I also need to clear up a question I got via email today from a gentleman. He was asking about some of my terms of service. And one thing, if you take a look at our backcountry discovery route bookings, there's a little note at the bottom that says minimum 4 people required basically to run this adventure. And that does not mean that you need to find 4 people to take a specific motorcycle adventure. That means that, from a cost perspective, from a business perspective here at Ben Motorcycle Adventures, if, for instance, I don't have 4 people that want to go ride the backcountry discovery route in Arizona, for me, it's really not cost effective, and odds are, at least here in 2019, I am not going to go. But you are more than welcome to book any of these tours, and I'm doing my best to round up people to go on some of these rides too. So again, just wanted to clear up those terms of service, if you will. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me, benmotorcycleadventures@gmail.com, or hit me up on Facebook or Instagram at Ben Motorcycle Adventures. Don't forget about that KTM 790 Adventure R Facebook group that I've created. It's a private group. Just answer a simple question. I will grant you entry, and you will be able to see some of the latest videos and content surrounding that motorcycle. Moving forward, you can follow along with my build and my videos once I take delivery of my KTM 790. And again, KTM 790 Adventure R Facebook group should be a good time. Look me up in there. 3 amazing podcasts coming at you next week. We start on Monday with MotoMinded. That's motominded.com. Clever solutions for KTM, Beta, Gas, and Husqvarna riders like myself. We're able to talk with Chris, and I'm really looking forward to publishing that episode on Monday. We're going to follow that up Tuesday with Kinga Tanajuska at On Her Bike on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Again, at On Her Bike. She's traveling around the world. It's going to be an amazing story. Really looking forward to putting that out. And then lastly, on Thursday, we're going to talk to Jocelyn Snow, Women's International GS Trophy team member. She's been all over the world riding BMWs. Can't wait to put that one out either. So a lot of content coming at you to close out the month of February. And you know what? I think that's going to wrap it up. Episode 25, Bend Motorcycle Adventures podcast. I'm going to get out of here. You guys stay safe, and we will see you Monday.